Welcome to Kinship Cafe. I am your host, Jim Jones, and today I am joined with Sean Croizier. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And today we're going to toy around with this idea about how do we perceive reality. But just before we do that, would you like to start us off with a song?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Secondhand suit, some worn down pair of shoes, wore my favorite polka dot tie and got my hair cut too. I'm just a box of bones, a clickety clackety old man. Smell like liquor and cigarettes, and I live in my van. Give me a guitar and a bottle of booze. You better bet your ass and play the jazz and sing you the blues. I got really high hopes and low self-esteem. I smoke a lot of green, if you know what I mean, yeah. Green, if you know what I mean, yeah. Green, if you know what I mean, yeah. Green, if you know what I mean, yeah.
Sean, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is that an original song?
It is, yeah.
And what's it called?
You know what? I don't have a name for it yet. I think... it don't matter. I'll name it another time.
The Song with No Name.
Song with no name.
All right. Well, great job. I love the stuff with the looping. I mean, that's just like such a whole nother instrument, really.
Yeah, it's a beast of its own.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
The more I see people use that, I'm constantly impressed. So, well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm getting there.
Yeah. So, maybe just before we jump into the other stuff, how long have you been doing music?
I've been playing for, probably like 16 years now.
Oh.
16.
Nice.
15, 16. Yeah. Who's counting? You know?
Yeah. And
it's rough.
Just having fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The most fun. It could get challenging to stay in the fun zone, but yeah, trying to have as much fun as possible all the time.
Yeah. Well, I know the musicians that I know that are working musicians, it's hardest working people I know. So, yeah, I get it.
Harder every day, too.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, we're happy to have you here, and hopefully we can do a little promotion for you and get some stuff out there for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, perception of reality.
Yes.
This is always a fun one for me because, we have, if we don't think about it, I don't mean this necessarily in a negative way, but we have what we might call a naive concept about how we perceive reality, in the sense that what we see is what is, or what we hear, or how we interpret things. And it's not until we take some time to really reflect on and maybe study about how our senses and how our minds work that we realize how much mediation is going on, and that we don't have as direct access to the real world sometimes as we think we do. And that can create some interesting challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot about the challenges we have, especially in our current political climate, about people being able to come to any kind of consensus or agreement about important things, like climate change.
That should be like obvious too. But,
well, but it's not, is it? Right?
It's not. Yeah.
And that's probably complicated by the fact that we have people with vested interests that are finding, outliers in terms of the scientific community to present that question, that possible doubt for people. Probably a lot like what happened with the cigarette industry, trying to produce science to say that cigarette didn't cause cancer.
Oh, I never heard that.
Oh, well, there's like a lot of this back and forth all the time.
It obviously causes cancer, right?
Well, I think we're pretty convinced on that now.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was a battle, right? Because both sides would roll out their scientists to claim their position. Yeah,
but usually one side is like more factual, right? Like, especially when it comes to science.
Well, that's the tricky part, is because they're both claiming to use science, right? So that's where, it becomes incumbent on the audience, the public, to have a certain amount of scientific literacy in order to evaluate, at least at a high level, the kinds of claims or statements that people are making. But that can be...
Gotta back it up.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little intimidating, right?
It really is.
Because people are like, well, what do I know about chemistry? Or, I didn't like that topic.
It's where I stand.
Yeah, so with that, what are your thoughts about, maybe we'll just start at the personal level. So if we want to try and have a sense of understanding about what's going on in our world, how do you try to navigate that? Where do you start?
I start by trying to understand that I will most likely never have a grasp completely on anything.
Okay.
That's where I am. I don't come in strong on any topic because I know I have a lot to learn, and even if I think I'm right, I'm like my own devil's advocate a lot of the time too,
Well, that's a really important position.
Yeah, it keeps you level.
How did you get there? Because there's a lot of people who don't do that for themselves.
I didn't start that way. Yeah, it's something you learn and grow into for sure. It's like, because when I was a kid, I'd be like stubborn and, hard-headed and think I was always right about everything. Think I know everything and how everything works and how everything is, but I think there comes a point in everybody's life where it's just that moment where like you're just like, wow, wait a second, I thought I knew everything, but I don't.
Yeah.
And for those people out there who haven't run into that, you will. It'll hit you soon,
Yeah.
But it's definitely humbling And I think it's a good way to be. I think it's a great way to be.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. The having a level of humility about what we know and don't know, and it's funny because as much as I know about that, I still find myself wanting to hold on to something like, yeah, I got this, I know this, right, and wanting to defend it or debate about it, and but I have to catch myself. But even recently, I had something where somebody brought up this topic that I never had heard of, or at least I didn't remember hearing of it before. And there's so much of this like pseudoscience out there, right? Especially around like New Age or spiritualism type stuff, where they try to bring in like quantum mechanics or something to try and justify something, and it just doesn't even make sense how they're trying to use it. So I'm always kind of on guard about that. But initially when they're telling me about this thing, my defenses kind of went up, and I was like, yeah, why haven't I heard about this, right? But then I went and I looked it up. And I was like, whew, whole branch, never even heard of before, and it's as legitimate as anything. Yeah. And I was just like, see, there it goes again.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you went and you learned your own way about that certain thing, and it worked out better for you in understanding it, right?
Well, I'm just trying to pay attention to when there's something in me that kind of starts to get bristled, like they don't know what they're talking about, or this is not factual information.
Okay. When
I feel that kind of rising up in me, then I feel like, okay, I gotta pause for a moment, and let's check this out. Don't just assume.
Yeah.
Right? And wait until I've had a chance to kind of look at it before I come to some kind of conclusion. Yeah.
Definitely.
So did you have something in particular that was kind of like a turning point for you when you realized that we've got to be kind of humble about this whole thing?
Yeah. You know what? I tell this story a lot, actually. And I feel like I'll never stop telling this story.
Yeah.
Because it just mixes so well with pretty much anything, anything I want to talk about with somebody. But letting go of pride was a big thing, and that was the turning point, I believe. So I was told to let go of my pride, and what I did was I puffed up, and I was like, no way, I ain't prideful. Shut up. That ain't me. And then just proved me wrong right away. But, so a little bit after that, it took a little more than just hearing it. Hearing, you got to drop that pride, boy. But once I let go of that pride, just things started turning around, and my eyes started really being open. Like, just relationships started getting better for me. I started, I stopped being stubborn, so I opened up my mind. I started being more open to everything, and less walls, all my walls started breaking down. But that turning point was because of this man named Chip Roberson, and I always got to recognize him for that. Chip Roberson and Cameron Lyman, my teachers in high school. Great guys, great people. We were in this class called peer counseling, and they ripped into us,
Wow.
And they really, really made sure we were able to leave high school with a better understanding of how real it is out there, and what you really need to think about and be open to and let go of, Yeah.
So I know in a lot of areas that I work in that when there's that humility about what we know, it kind of goes hand in hand with this idea that, well, is there no foundation? Is there no sure ground that we can stand on, that we can, hang our hat on as like, this is truth and this is kind of a foundation point that we can spring from, right? The idea that we're kind of open and not necessarily committed to knowing the truth about necessarily anything, kind of leaves us a little bit in midair, right?
Yeah.
And you can see why there's a tendency to want to hold on to this idea of something that we can say, this is definite, right?
Well, it's scary when it's not that way. It's scary.
Right.
So people don't want to be scared.
Sure. So it totally makes sense why they do that. So how do you handle not having that foundation? Or is there a different kind of foundation?
A lot of times I can't handle it. I mean, I feel like, I fall into that pretty regular, like, I'm just like everybody else in the world who is just as scared. I have no idea what's going on. And when those moments come, when like that existential dread sets, it's tough to overcome it. But what I try to do is just do something creative, do something, distract yourself, really. I mean, ultimately, that's a good way, in my opinion, to not get stuck in that. Just distract yourself in a good way, in a constructive way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking.
Was that the question?
No, that was good.
Yeah,
that was good. I'm going to come around to some of the things you said because I want to follow up on some of that. I just wanted to add to this that I think, like in my own case, part of how I moved from needing to have this foundation to realizing that things have to be more fluid, right? I kind of shifted what I was thinking of as the foundations. So for me, one of the foundations is I want to continue to pursue trying to understand truth, right? Nice. Not that I know what it is, and not that I'm ever going to fully arrive.
But you'll always be trying to understand it.
Yeah, but that becomes one of the focal points, right? That's kind of like that guiding light that kind of is that thing to hold on to in all the chaos of uncertainty, right? Is there's this direction, this path. And the other thing is really trying to recognize that, life is about growing, right? It's about change. Things that don't grow or things that don't change aren't alive, right? So if life is what I want to be about, and when we're talking about, Kinship Cafe and this idea of well-being and questions about meaning in life, we have to recognize that we have to be open to change and growth in order to continue to be alive. Mm-hmm. And you can see when people start to get really dogmatic about particular things and they're unwilling to change or see that growth, that's when things start to get ugly.
It's comfort.
It's comfort
people
until
get
you
too
come in contact with somebody of a different position.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's why it's important to be flexible and willing to go with the flow.
Yeah.
Let other people's lives intermingle with yours and help guide yours too.
Well, yeah.
Be open to that.
They open up new possibilities, ways of looking at things that maybe I wasn't aware of, right? And if I'm open to that experience, that can enrich my own experience. Yeah. I mean, or we can be afraid of it and push back, right? And we maintain our position, but we've kind of closed ourselves off from anything that's different. And that is, again, not a life of growth and change, but one of stagnant, right? Of not growing. But you mentioned existential dread, when that hits.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a strong one these days.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, like, where does that come from for you? Like, what brings that up?
Well, I'm a night owl. And so yeah, it's usually at those weary hours, you know, those early hours, and when you're alone and you just have a lot of time to just, it's you and your thoughts, you know. It's you and your thoughts, and the existential dread. That's when it comes in. You mostly when I'm alone, and that's why I try to surround myself with a lot of people at all times.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so with the existential part of that, right? I think we're talking about like meaning for existence.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the dread part is that you're finding a lack of meaning for existence, or what?
Yes.
What's okay?
Yeah, I get down on myself about music and entertainment. You know, where I am, and because ultimately I want it to be my career, and that's the rest of your life. Essentially, you know, your career, it's most of your life. You spend most of your life doing this one thing, and if it doesn't work out, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? You know, and like that kind of settles it. And like, what are people gonna think of me? And like this, and that. You know, all of that BS. All of that settles in. What else? It's I don't know. I feel like everybody has that. Like, sometimes I feel like quitting because it's so bad. The existential dread's so bad. I just feel like giving up.
Yeah.
I'm like on the edge, you know?
Like, what's it all about, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, maybe everything that I've been doing up to this point in my life is wrong. Maybe I am, maybe I have to do something different starting now. You know, like, whoa.
Yeah.
And that it's heavy. It's heavy. It could freak you out.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gnarly.
Well, I think you're not alone with those thoughts, right? I
definitely
mean,
not alone. Some people act like they're stronger than that. But
well, I think there's some people that aren't as predisposed to want to think those thoughts, like curious about them. You know what I mean? Like, they've got other things that occupy them and keep them busy, and they don't find themselves wanting to even have that curiosity. And I think, like in my case and probably in yours, I want to know about life, right? Like I said, there's that truth quest. And so in doing so, you start to discover things about, you know, the nature of reality. And maybe this is something to bring it back, you know, to that perception. How do we see things? And the more you learn about it, it does challenge a lot of our traditional ideas and things that we grew up with, where we just assumed we knew about things. And when those things crumble, and we're kind of back to that thing of being in midair, you know, and it's like, okay, what's this all about, right? And so we've got to really kind of rebuild that purpose, that meaning, that direction in life, hopefully around things that are going to stand up, right? So I guess a lot of it for me has been, there was kind of like an initial shock when you start thinking about, like, how does this world actually work? You know, if you take the time and start, even at a kind of a high level, start to dig into like physics and high level chemistry, because I know that's a scary topic for a lot of people, you know, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that just operates according to these basic laws, and it explains pretty much everything. Even though we don't know everything, we know enough that we got a basic idea, and that doesn't come with this thing called meaning or purpose, right? And so you start to think, well, does that mean there isn't any? And it's been kind of an interesting circle for me where it's kind of come back around to seeing that I think there is this thing that we can understand as meaning or purpose in life that is an emergent property out of essentially a meaningless universe. Now, I know that might sound kind of crazy.
It's a lot.
You want to dive down that a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so here's the idea. So when we're talking about emergent properties, we're talking about things that are truly novel or new that are more than the parts that make it up. So one of the classic examples, if we're thinking about like chemistry, right, or particle physics or anything along those lines, is when certain things start to come together, they form substances that have properties that are not derivable from the components. So if we think about water, H2O, right, that means we've got hydrogen and oxygen. Now those things apart are both gases. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that would make you think that if you took an oxygen molecule and a hydrogen molecule and mixed them together, that all of a sudden you're going to have this thing that's wet.
Yeah.
Right? So this is like a truly new property that emerges out of this chemical combination of two different substances, that the idea of wetness isn't derivable from the two gases. It's a new thing that emerges. So when we're talking about something like meaning in life, right, where some of this is coming from is that as we go through this process of like understanding how these different chemical evolutions happen all the way up until we start to hit to this biological evolution, humans are really at the far end of this process. And as we start coming into the scene, even with the idea of mammals, there is new ways that we're learning to navigate our world. So if you think about something like a beetle, I was watching a beetle the other day. There's this track outside of my door that's kind of like this little metal tube kind of that runs along the side of the wall, and it kind of dead ends. And I was watching this beetle just kind of cruising along, and he's got his like little antennas, and if he runs into something, he'll move and go around it, right? Yeah. So he's got kind of like this reflective reactions to things that are just kind of like these reflexes that he can't think ahead. He can't project what's going to happen. He's just reacting to immediate stimulus and making adjustments, right? Mm-hmm. So he comes up to this tube, and he's like, "Oh, I can fit in there." I'm like, this dude is lost because he's going to travel down that tube, get to the end, and it's blocked. And then and I don't even know if he could turn around or how he could get out of there, right? And so one of the things, when we think about how life gets progressively more complicated in terms of its ability to navigate its world, evolution is favoring traits that are adaptive to help life succeed in its mission for continuing to live or to pass on its genes, right? So the more we can navigate our world, the more we can avoid predators or danger, and the more we can do positive things like finding food and finding mates and safety and that kind of thing, the better we're going to survive. So we started introducing more complex things into how our brain works and navigating the world. So at the level of the beetle, there's not any consciousness there. It's just all reflexes. Yeah. But all those same reflexes are actually in us. right? But what starts to happen is we've got new layers that come on top of that, and those layers are things that start to bring in things like emotions, and emotions at their core level are just, they're like drivers, right? It's like we'll have an emotional reaction to something that we can't necessarily put words into, you know? Like love is one of those kinds of things. Like you can have an intense feeling towards somebody and they're like, tell me why you love me. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to express it because it's like there's something below like that conscious level, right? And it drives us, right? Desire is one of our drives. Hunger is one of our drives. You know, fear, anger, these kinds of things, they motivate us and move us in different ways that are a little bit above like this idea of that just simple reflex. But the more we started to acquire these skills for how do we navigate our world, the next thing that became like the big jump for helping us to move forward was the ability to project into the future possibilities.
Yeah.
Like, what if I go this way versus going that way, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as that starts to happen, this is really kind of where consciousness comes into the picture.
Yeah.
Because if we think about like memories and how they're stored, it's not like a movie. We're not watching like a film of something. It's kind of like a script. And as we call that script back to mind, we've got all sorts of other parts of the brain that do things like, okay, I'm going to fill in the color, I'm going to fill in the lines, I'm going to fill in the motion, all that kind of stuff that brings it to life.
Yeah.
Right? And the benefit of this is, well, there's a benefit and a drawback. The benefit is because the script isn't like an actual picture or movie of the event, it's reconstructed at the time that we see it in our mind, we can use that same kind of technology to see things that don't exist, right? That's why we can imagine things like dragons or unicorns or whatever, but it's also how we can imagine what would happen if I took this route versus that route. What would it look like if I made this decision versus that decision? And we can create that script and fill in the stuff and see it, and it gives us this amazing ability to navigate in whole new ways, right? But at the same time, this is just kind of a little side note, this is also the problem of why memories are sometimes faulty. Because it's a script and not a movie, that script can sometimes get changed.
Yeah.
And when we recall it and all the other parts kick in to fill in the color, lines, motion, all that kind of stuff, it looks like we're seeing something that we never really saw. Right? I mean, or that we participated in something we never really participated in. So this is, I mean, that's kind of a side note, but it's an interesting issue because of how that process works. So bringing this all back around to this idea of meaning, right? So how we navigate, how we make those decisions, why we're trying to see into the future is we have some ultimate goals, if you will, that are kind of wired into us biologically, you know. One of them is stay alive. One of them is, you know, reproduce, right? I mean, those are some biggies. But as we started to develop these more robust systems, like with these additional types of emotions and that kind of stuff, and being able to plan, we started to be able to also set our own goals that aren't necessarily the same as the biological. So people may choose not to have children, right? Yeah. Which is against the biological directive, but we can supersede that with other things. But as we meet goals, we experience a certain amount of well-being, right? When we're outside of, you know, what we think we should be doing, we've got this appraisal system that's checking out what's happening, what's going on in our life, and it can make us feel either good or bad based off of how well are we doing with our perceived vision of where we should be going, right? So at a certain level, we've got, by virtue of being alive, some basic foundational goals that are wired into us that have to do with life and it going on, that has now been able to be augmented with additional pieces of information with our consciousness, that we can recognize how our life and our being able to thrive is based on a lot of stuff outside of us. Our environment, other people, those relationships. And so the more we recognize that and we start to see, okay, well, if I value my life and where I want to go, these other things become important, and they can start to take on a value that then becomes part of that are we on track stuff that's happening with our emotions that gives us feedback on well-being. So we start to have a biologically derived meaning for life that isn't necessarily coming from a universe that has meaning, but it's emerged out of how we have evolved to have
the universe in your mind.
Well, I mean, it's like we kind of come with meaning. We bring meaning to the universe, which is really interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's mind-blowing, really. Yeah, like the beetle. I like that that you use the beetle there. The beetle just doesn't think twice.
Yeah.
Whatever he runs into, he's going for it, right? Yeah. We, as humans, have that ability to, if we had antennae, if we bumped into a wall, we'd be like, we'd see all sorts of ways, instead of just like, oh, I gotta stop or go left and right, whatever, or just turn around. We could think like, just like we could jump over the wall, we could get a rope.
Right.
The
tools. Yeah.
Right? Oh, man.
But we're also wondering what's on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
That
too. Do I want to be on the other side of this wall, or is this the safe side? Yeah. I'm comfortable here. But man, yeah, you just blew my mind just now, actually. My goodness.
Well, it's like for me, I kind of went through this weird loop where earlier on, we just met each other pretty recently, so you don't know a lot about my background. But I'm actually also, among other things, a pastor. And
I think I remember you telling me that one.
Pretty far outside the box kind of a pastor, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
And, heavy emphasis on cultural anthropology, social linguistics, and really trying to understand, how do cultures work, how do people work in that regards, and how worldviews shape these ideas and justify, how we set up, governments or other types of policies. And it was very much kind of a top-down from a cultural perspective, looking at how it has the impact on life for this idea of, what's it all about. And coming around to finding like this biological basis, it has been just fascinating to see how these two different directions, are really kind of merging together. And it's different, from where I was, but it's starting to have more of a foundation to it, a basis for it, rather than my problem that I've had with a lot of religious perspectives on things is that they are making claims that can't ultimately be justified, right? If they're saying that something is this way because, God ordained it, or God prescribed it, or something like that, or I had a vision, or something like that. I don't want to, claim that people don't have experiences, right? We might have a difference in how we interpret those experiences, but it's hard for me to think about how do we base our life. Like you said, have I everything I've been doing up to this point been wrong? Do I need to change right now and do something different? That's kind of what I felt like with myself, is that I got into a certain point and I was like, all of a sudden, oh my goodness, there's a serious flaw here. We're going to have to do a quick, diversion.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what happened with some of the religious stuff. Is I was hopeful that this is where I was going to find some of those answers about, meaning of life and that kind of thing, and how do we get there. But then, started to realize some of this stuff ultimately there's not really an objective answer to, right? Mm-hmm. It still gives a lot of meaning and hope and purpose for people. And I'm not trying to take that away. I'm not anti-religious or against religion, but in my own personal quest, I've needed to have something a little bit more substantial that I could actually, hang my hat on, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And the fact that it went from that kind of that existential dread of there is no meaning in the universe except for what we decide, right? Kind of this very arbitrary thing, and just like, well, you're just going to have to buck it up, right?
Yes.
You're just going to have to
bite the bullet,
face it, right? To now seeing how there's actually a whole nother way of looking at this thing where there is this kind of concept of meaning, but it's more of an emergent property that comes with us. And that's been just fascinating ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's crazy that we're able to think about this and these things. That's incredible to me. Like, a part of me thinks that life is not meant to be overthought, though. Mm-hmm. And like, what we're able to do just makes it so much more complicated. I think maybe like when it comes to reality, or my goodness, what was the topic?
Our perceptions of reality.
Perceptions of reality.
Yeah.
I think a good perception of reality is like a really simple version, or simple perception. I like keeping it simple, and when you keep it simple, you don't tend to worry too much about life and where it's going to take you, and what you're supposed to do, and why we're all here, and why is everything here. If you just don't think about that and just, like, man, monks do it so well, how do they do it so well? I want to know how they do it.
Well, there is,
Peace.
I think, a lot of diversity in how people engage and pursue and participate in life, and a lot of that's going to be based on our different predispositions, right? So my wife just does not enjoy going down these roads and thinking through a lot of these thoughts, right? I mean, that is not her game. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that, her perspective is right and mine is wrong, or vice versa.
Sure.
It just means, I've got this burning desire in me that forces me to look at these things and go down those roads and try to understand. She's got different desires, right, that focus on different aspects of life, which is great, right? Not if we were all the same, how boring would that be?
Super boring. Absolutely boring. But man, sometimes I hope for boring. Sometimes I crave boring, because life can get brutal, and those thoughts can get brutal, could drive a person mad. And the quest for knowledge and truth, it's a deep well.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, if it's something that somebody is uncomfortable with, there's, like you said, other ways that they can pursue it, right? Mm-hmm. And certainly, the means of the monk, if we're talking about like meditation or mindfulness, are some great ways to learn about how do we direct our attention and being very intentional about our focus. It does a lot to shape the way we think about the world and how we navigate the world. And those are some great tools that we've also talked about on Kinship Cafe and actually done some experiments with, or not experiments, but education about.
Sure. I'd like to watch those.
Yeah. Well, and it's something I think that we're going to do more of a regular class that we're going to offer as well.
Oh, cool.
So, because it is I know in my life it's been such a profound tool for being able to get a handle on a lot of different things, including, like in my case, I had a weird kind of medical experience where just going in for an eye exam kind of triggered something where it kind of caused my body to like shut down.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it gave me a lot of anxiety, especially at night, because the sensation of falling asleep was very much like the same sensation of what happened in the office there. And so my body would freak out anytime I felt sleepy because it thought the same thing was happening again. Right? It was kind of like maybe a mild form of PTSD kind of a thing. I hate to use that term because usually that's for far more serious things. But my body it needed to get readjusted, right, to not equate falling asleep with something bad. And mindfulness was certainly one of the things that I used to be able to do that, because I'm not somebody who, really wants to, reach for the drugs for that. And I guess I'm a little bit too much of a control freak to really, just let go that way.
Sure.
But, wow. It really just changed things. And not just that, but all sorts of things. So I'm a big fan of mindfulness.
Yes. When it came to those pills and that you didn't want to take, you ended up taking them, right? To help your...
I tried once.
Yeah?
And what happened there, I'd asked the doctor, I'm like, is this going to specifically address the issue of anxiety, or is it just going to make it so I can't help but fall asleep? Mm-hmm. And he tried to assure me it was going to help with the anxiety, and he was wrong. It was basically, I went through that process of falling asleep, but I couldn't stop it, right? And so that was just like even worse.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to go down that road.
Yeah.
But
I want to go down that road.
Yeah, but the thing is, it forced me to really look at and understand different things. And like I said, that mindfulness has become so helpful, and it's just so simple in so many aspects of life. So, yeah, I think I was better off than if I would have gone down the drug road, at least in my case. Sometimes there are definitely cases where I think that medication makes sense. I'm not saying medication is wrong, but in my particular situation. Well, listen, this has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
Hopefully
I didn't stray too much all over the place.
That keeps it fun. Keeps it fun. But would you like to close us out with a song?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Right on.
Waiting for you there. I'll be
Sean, thank you again.
Thank you.
That was just great. So this last song, what was that one called? Or does this one have a name?
I think I've got a name for this one. It's Everywhere, Nowhere.
Everywhere, Nowhere.
Everywhere, Nowhere.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming out today.
Yeah, thanks.
And I know you're getting ready to maybe move out of state, but
yeah.
if you find yourself back down here again at some point, I'd love to have you back on the show.
Definitely. I would
right.
love to be. Like, I enjoy my time, you know. Talking about these things are important, and getting it out there is even more important.
Hey.
So,
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on board.
thanks, Jim.
Hey, we'll catch you next time. Be well, everybody.